I actually do not know the initial reaction of the parents when the aunt was diagnosed to have biliary atresia. But now, after 5 to 6 months of the diagnosis, the parents look to be very stable, and at least the parents have completely recovered from the confusion they received at the time of diagnosis, and they are already completely ready to fight against the disease.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm a mother, a wife, and an entrepreneur. I started a company called DocDoc. It's an online portal to connect patients with doctors. And CEO and co-founder, and Cole, my husband here, is the chairman and co-founder as well. And we're here today because we're admitting our daughter, Ran Karis, into the hospital because she will soon be undergoing a procedure, a live liver transplant, because she has a rare condition called biliary atresia.
Biliary atresia is it's a pretty significant condition, and it's one that doesn't really have there's not a lot of incremental steps one can take. So 20 hours into the diagnosis, they wanted her on the OR table to do a fairly extensive operation. It's called the Kasai operation. It was started in Japan in the 70s. And the outcomes of it are terrible, frankly. I mean, it buys you time, but the ultimate end state of it is, in all but one case now in existence, a liver transplant. And so when you're first confronted with this idea that your child's going to have a transplant, it's significant. I mean, there's just no other way to look at it. It's a life-changing event for your child, and as the primary caregivers, it's a life-changing event for you as well. And so then you begin to look at, there's many aspects to it. So it is very dependent on the surgeon. The outcomes do vary by who holds the knife in the situation. So I would strongly encourage anyone that is in this situation to find the best possible people.
I think for us, because I've been in the healthcare sector for the last 10 years, I knew which doctors to go to for advice, and from that we were connected. We were connected with the right doctor, and Dr. Tanaka, Dr. Kiuchi, and team were the right ones.
They're some of the very best in the world.
They're the best in the world. And so as soon as we found out the test results that she had to undergo a Kasai procedure, this was the first surgery, and it really just holds or buys time before the liver transplant. She had to go straight into the operating room, but we decided to fly to Japan.
Yeah,
actually, fly to Kobe, Japan within 24 hours.
Yeah, within 24 hours of her diagnosis, she was in Japan in the OR being operated on there.
Right.
And we did that. The Kasai operation is not one where the person holding the knife makes a huge difference. It's it's an extensive operation, but the outcomes aren't really dependent on the surgeon. But we knew that ultimately this would lead to a transplant, and so we wanted the best people in the world to start with, so we could build that relationship and stick with that. When it's going through a transplant as a parent, as a donor, as a primary caregiver of somebody who has to go through this, there's a tremendous amount of information that you need to process. One of the things that I would really highlight to anybody who ever goes through this, or as anyone who's watching this video, is that there was a very interesting study done at Stanford where they actually looked at surgeons that were going into procedures to have done on themselves. And the surgeon was always trying to control their own procedure because obviously they knew a ton because they were surgeons. Well, it turns out that surgeons have more complications when they're being operated on than the average patient. And that's because they get in the way of the surgeon. And so when you're confronted with something like this, the most logical choice and the most reasonable thing to do is to recognize that you don't control the outcome. You absolutely do not. And a liver transplant is such an incredibly complex operation. It isn't just the operation itself, it isn't just the nature of transplantation, it isn't just trying to match biochemistry between two different patients. It's remarkably complex. And once you realize that you're never going to completely grasp it, you're never even going to grasp it as well as a poor surgeon will have forgotten more about this procedure than you're ever going to understand as a parent. then you need to kind of abstract yourself, find the best people possible, and then let go of the outcome, because you can't control it. You can only control the process. And I think there's a lot to be said for looking at, to going to see a psychologist early, and for yourself and for your children and for your spouse, because this is a heavy thing that you're about to go through. There's a lot that goes into this, and it's very interesting. So in the Netherlands, they did a study that just came out. It was published about a year ago, and it was talking about the outcomes of children that have lived for 20 years with a live liver transplant. And it turns out that from a physical perspective, there's very little difference between them in terms of quality of life and the average student and the average child that age. However, from a psychological point of view, they tend to be significantly worse. And that's because I think the parents, from the trauma that we're experiencing, we transmute that to our child and the child growing up. Because Rand's not going to remember any of this. And so anybody going through this, you guys need to remember that your child won't remember it, but you will. You'll never forget it.
As parents.
As parents. And so it's learning how to let go of it. Once it's done, it's going to be a big deal. Running the process to the cleanest way possible, and then just letting go of the outcome. And I'm very thankful for some of the psychologists that I've been working with, because I think it's made a big difference. And I would strongly encourage people not to overlook that aspect of this, because I think it's very important.
I think that the key part for us is really to be strong as parents, because I think that our daughter senses who we are and how we're feeling, the energy that we have. And so I think it's very important to, one, be knowledgeable about this, and two, to put a lot of faith in our doctors and the caretakers here, and thirdly, ourselves, is just to take care of ourselves and be strong with this, because I think she senses our energy, and thankfully she's been happy for this last week. She's been smiling a lot, which is good as she's going into this condition, to be in good spirits and good energy and be strong, because I know that not all children have that sort of are probably more in a weaker state. So we're just fortunate that she is she's doing all right in terms of condition-wise going into this surgery.
So am I nervous about the surgery? I'm actually not that nervous about it. I've kind of resigned myself to this being one of these things in life that you just have to go through. So the way I think about it, I used to do a lot of ski racing, and I've taken, about every season I would take a really big fall. And if you statistically thought about what are the odds that something really bad happened to one of those falls, it's pretty good, actually. So I look at this as like, I'm about to go into a big fall. There's a 92% chance that I bounce right out of this with very little kind of side effects, long-term or otherwise. So the odds are pretty good for the liver transplant donor. Statistically, the biggest odds you face are anesthesia-related risks. That being said, I'm still mortal, and the idea of going into a 5-hour procedure that I don't need to go into is not a comforting thought. And there's just no way to make it a comforting thought. But I take comfort from the fact that I am incredibly thankful that it's 2013. I'm incredibly thankful that if you look at the studies and you look at the kind of survivability curves, quality of life curves, that the liver transplantation is one of the fastest evolving sciences. And that even to this procedure 5 years ago, even now, it's significantly better than it was then. And so the people that will be watching this video in the years to come, they'll be facing even better odds than we do now. And so I'm just thankful that we live in a time period, and our daughter was born in a time period where there's an outcome. There's something that can be done about this. And the odds are pretty good that she's going to live a really good life. And that's fantastic.